So, for the individual activity for you this month, I've included my grief individual curriculum. Now, grief doesn't necessarily have to do with the month of October, or even necessarily fall, but unfortunately, it is something a lot of our students are experiencing throughout the year. So, I wanted to give it to you early in the school year so you can use it again and again as needed. Now, also, I know many students may have experienced loss related to the pandemic, so you may be dealing with this more this school year than in years in the past. So I want to walk you through this curriculum. It has a lot of different components, but first up is the counselor's guide. So the counselor's guide starts with the objectives. So we want students to become aware of how their body is responding to their strong emotions, to self-regulate when they're feeling these strong emotions, identify coping skills to use, and a support system to turn to. I then have the Ask a Student standards, mindset, and behaviors that pair up with these objectives. And then just a couple tips for implementing this curriculum is that it's best to sandwich the session activities with a fun icebreaker and closure activity. So, the content for this individual counseling session is going to be pretty deep and pretty heavy given the nature of the topic. So we don't want students to return to class super upset. We want them to be able to return to class ready to learn. So if you do something kind of fun to break the ice and to loosen them up, and then if you have a closure activity so they can return to class regulated and in a good state to get back to their academics. Obviously, this is going to be on their mind all the time, but we don't want to dig really deep and break open all their feelings and then send them back to class a mess. So it's nice to kind of sandwich in some other activities. So, for example, an icebreaker activity that I would recommend you could start with could be Jenga. You could do conversation Jenga or just play regular Jenga just to kind of get the kiddo, comfortable talking to you in a one-on-one setting, especially obviously during the first session, but even after they've been coming to you for a couple weeks, maybe they're kind of dreading it. Every time they come, they feel sad. They have to think about their loss. So it's okay to do something fun in the beginning. And then a sample closure activity. I have some stretching videos linked for you here from Go Noodle. Go Noodle has so many great resources, but doing a little stretch, some mindful breathing, something to have them refocus and regroup before returning to class. Now I've also included here a feelings check. So you'll see my feelings check poster. I have two versions for you depending on the age of the child, and just some tips for implementing the feelings check. So just like I do with small groups, I like to do these with individuals. So you definitely want to check in, see how they're feeling and why. It can be related to their loss or just completely separate. Maybe they're feeling excited because they're having a sleepover with their friend tonight. And, you can have them identify a feeling pointing on the poster. They can use a scale of 1 to 10, and you can even have them log these feelings so you can kind of review together how their feelings are changing. And I like to use the analogy of grief as a roller coaster and how some days you feel great and some days you feel really bad. And it's not linear progress. It's continually changing. Now then I have some individual counseling best practices and recommendations. So these aren't specific just to grief, but individual counseling in general. Anything from intake to graduate. So I talk about, some tips for collecting referrals, communicating with parents and teachers, tips for scheduling your sessions, and tips for collecting data. I have a little planning checklist for you for when you're starting to plan out your outlines, but I have everything for you here, so you can add to it if you want, but that checklist should be pretty simple for you because I have it all included here. I have some things to consider, that you want to build rapport and get to know the student on a personal level. You want to try to check in with them outside of outside of the session. So, in the hallway, maybe stop by their class, maybe at lunch. Keep things organized with a folder. And then you do want to have an agenda, but stay flexible, especially with, grief as the topic. You don't know what's going to come up or how the student's going to be feeling that day. So you don't want to have too rigid of a schedule. And then I have some fun ideas for what to do when the student has concluded your sessions to really celebrate their progress, reflect and review final data, and then identify best next steps. Okay, so let's get to the meat and potatoes. This is the fun stuff. These are the actual activities you're going to be doing during the sessions. So this curriculum consists of activities and journals. So here are the activities. Now I have 5 different ones, so you can do these over 5 sessions. You can do these over 7 sessions. You can do these over 10 sessions. You may want to spend more than one session on an activity. It's totally up to you depending on how long you plan on meeting with a student. I usually recommend 6 to 8 weeks. But these are 5 activities. And of course, you could always supplement them with some of your own activities or extend them longer. It's completely customizable depending on the nature of your student and their needs. So the first one is the Colors of My Heart activity. So the kids are going to color in the heart with different colors to show different emotions that they're experiencing on their grief journey. So I encourage you to let them select which colors are going to represent which emotion. We may think in our head, oh, green's happy, red's angry, and blue's sad. But maybe they want to use blue for happy and yellow for angry and purple for sad. So it's up to them. And they can even mark a little key on the side to indicate the colors. And then just let them color away. Their entire heart might be anger. It might be fear. It might be sadness. It might be joy. You never know. All emotions are welcome. You really want to encourage that. And then you can talk to them about, have them explain which colors represent which feelings and why one color's, on there more than the other. Now, another way they could do this is a craft. So you could either do both these in conjunction, or you could have the students select whether they'd rather do coloring or craft. You could do this over 2 weeks. Like I said, a lot of flexibility here given on the need of the student. So you can glue 2 popsicle sticks together and then wrap around different colored yarn to show the different emotions. So this is a very physical, tactile activity that's nice for processing the emotions. And again, the same thing, some colors may take up more room on their heart. Then they can keep that token with them as a reminder. Then the next activity is a grief scavenger hunt. So this one you can hide household objects around the room and have students search for them, so around your office. And then when they find them, they're going to explain how it relates to their loss. So for example, and let them get as creative as they want with this, but here are some examples if they need a little guidance. If you had a spoon or a fork, they could talk about their loved one's favorite food, or a candle, how their loved one smelled, or a CD, a song that reminds them of their loved one. So just household objects, things you may already have in your office, but this is just an easier way to get a conversation going and less formal than discussion cards. The next activity is a social story. So on this one, the students can read this story and then assemble the die and roll to answer the question. So you're going to read the story about Brianna. So this is a great way to externalize, their experience. Maybe they can relate to Brianna, maybe they can't. A lot of times seeing another student's story helps the kids process their own. So in this case, it's a fictional student, but maybe, reading about Brianna's story, you can discuss what you have in common with her or what they do not. And then those are the discussion questions that are on the die. So you print it out, cut it, and paste, or you can even cut out the sides and slip them in a die you already have, roll, and then the student can answer. So, there's things like, have you ever felt like her? What advice would you give to her? Who could she talk to? And then in turn, as they say these things, hopefully they're having some light bulb moments about who they can talk to and what they can do. And then here is a think sheet. So kind of what I was talking about earlier about how the grief healing is not linear. Have the students write the date, and then they can, write on a scale of 1 to 10, their best feeling and their worst feeling to really see how their grief has progressed, and explain again that all feelings are welcome and okay. And finally, there are some discussion cards. So you just need a deck of playing cards, and you're going to play Go Fish. And each time the student gets a pair, they're going to draw and answer a discussion card. So just a more fun way to use traditional discussion cards about their support system, favorite memories, goals they would like to set, how they calm down, and what's changed in their family since their loss. So that's just a good way to get a discussion going. Now, in conjunction with the activities, we have a student journal. So at the end of each session, the student can complete the journal in class with you, or they can complete it independently at home and then review their answers with you. But here we go. The first week is the grief iceberg. So you want to talk to students how grief is like an iceberg, and others may not see what you're feeling underneath. So they're probably feeling a lot of different feelings, but maybe they're only showing a certain portrayal of emotions on the outside. So you want them to write emotions on the iceberg to demonstrate their grief. So they can write, maybe on the top they just look sad, but underneath maybe they really are angry. Journal 2 is about minimizing it. So, sometimes people say things to minimize their grief, like it's not that bad, or at least they weren't suffering, or something like that. And they may have good intentions, but this can still be very hurtful. So you want them to reflect on this. Has this happened to them? What did people say, and how did that make them feel? The third journal is actually a letter that they can write to their loved one. So they can write anything they want. You can let them keep this in their journal, or they can even put it in an envelope. They can crumple it up and throw it away. They can, whatever they feel they need to do with this letter, give them permission to do so. Number 4 is all about feelings, and it's talking about how grief looks different for different people and on different days. So let them write about their emotions, a time they felt angry or scared. Now, those may be easier, but what about happy or relieved? Have they felt that way at all? So maybe they feel relieved that they, don't have to listen to their dad's music anymore, or something like that. Let them again know that all feelings are okay. And the 5th journal prompt is ripples. So you want to talk about how grief's like a rock in a pond, and that while maybe the death or loss is the rock, ripples are secondary losses. So for example, if, like in that social story, the student's dad passed away and her parents were divorced, so she would only see her dad go to his house every other weekend. Well, now she doesn't go there at all because he passed away. But at that house, she also had neighbors that she liked. So a secondary loss is her neighbors, right? She doesn't get to see her dad's neighbors as much anymore. So that's something maybe the students haven't considered, that they're grieving more than just their initial loss. After the activities in the journals, the last tool I have for you is the counselor. These are some data tracking tools you can use with these students. So a rating scale. So each time that the student is meeting with you, they'll write their date. They have their name on here. And then, so I have this for 8 sessions, and they can write in 1 being the easiest for how their grief is, and 10 being the most difficult. So encourage them to be honest. There's no right or wrong answer. This is, again, reinforcing that idea that healing's not linear. Then, of course, we have our grief self-assessment that you will give to them before and after all the sessions to see how they've progressed. And then I have the digital form version for the self-assessment, so if you'd rather do it digitally. And then the behavior progress monitoring form. So this is what you will send out. The self-assessment you send to students, but this form you send to parents and teachers to have them identify the students' behaviors. So, if they're asking for help when they need it, if they can maintain composure and participate in usual activities, if they're using coping strategies, if they're able to share how they're feeling. You want parents and teachers to answer these, of course, with the date, and then you'll send the same form later at the end of sessions to compare. And there is a digital version of that form as well. Okay, guys, that's all for the grief individual curriculum. I know this can be a really tough topic to navigate with kids, but I hope these resources make you feel more confident in your ability to do so.